If you own one of the old Stradic 2000s or 1000s, you probably are aware that these are 15-year-old reels. If during your fishing times you notice that it's supposed to stop just like that, that's the super stopper bearing. It's supposed to do that. On occasion, it will do that. Now that's not me engaging the anti-reverse. That is the super stopper bearing slipping. See, there it goes. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to show you how to fix that. That's pretty easy to do. You need a pair of pliers, small set of screwdrivers, some kind of solvent. I like to use denatured alcohol. It works great. And you're going to need some oil or something to oil the reel back with once you get this done. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and start taking this reel apart. Take the spool off. To get the spool off, there's a few pieces here that you're going to take off. Also, there's a little a washer and then a drive gear. You want to take those off. There might be more than one washer. There may be 2 or 3 or 4 of them. Take those off and lay those out so you know which direction they go in. And then all you have is 2 screws on the top here, small Phillips screwdriver, and take those 2 screws out. Pretty easy to come out. Just come off pretty easily. There are 2 screws are out, and then there's a bolt on top of that. So you take that bolt out, that nut off the top of the spool. Simply just remove the nut. And then there's a bushing right here that goes on top of off the drive shaft. You'll take that off also. And now the spool will simply come off. Slides right off. This right here, this piece here is the super stopper bearing. This whole assembly is the bearing assembly. What you do is there's a bunch of screws in this. There's screws on top of it and screws below it. What you want to do is you just want to take the screws on top out. They're mounting screws that mount down into the frame. There's one here, there's one here, there's one here. Don't take the other ones apart. Make sure you look and make sure you're taking the right ones out, because otherwise the bearing will fall apart. So there's a screw here. I'm going to take that apart. Screw comes out. There's a screw here. That comes out. And then there's a screw on the back side right here. That screw comes out. So now you got 3 screws out. Now this whole bearing assembly will come off. Slides right off. Now it's kind of gooped up, man. There's all kinds of gunk in there. Looks like there's some grease and some oil in there, whatever. And then you've also got this assembly here, and that's kind of like a drive bearing. It goes on one way and only one way. Make sure that if you look at it, you can see it's thin on one side and thicker on the other. The thick side goes up. If you put the thin side up, the reel will no longer work. Put the denatured alcohol into this little bowl I've got. Takes a little bit, and while I mess around, I'm just going to take the whole bearing and just stick it in there. Let it do its little thing. I'm also going to take some of the denatured alcohol and clean up this little assembly here at the top. And once it's out, I use denatured alcohol because it dries real quick, but I'll take the other side and just dry it up just a little bit. While I'm in here, I might as well go on and drop a little bit of oil on it. I've got 2 types of oil here. This is a real thin oil. I like it because it's real thin. I'm just going to take one little drop and put it on that bearing. If you look, there's a bearing right there where the shaft is at. That basically spins. That's what keeps the shaft moving. So I'm going to take that bearing and drop a little drop of oil on it. Alright, leave that piece alone for now. This is really the nuts and bolts of this whole assembly, this little thing here. Now this particular clutch bearing, they're about 50 bucks if you wanted to replace it. And I've looked online to replace them, and I decided it's just not worth doing it. When I get to a point to where I can't clean it up and make it work anymore, it'll be time for the reel to be done. This reel is 15 years old, and I do this a couple times a year, and it works out really well for me. What I'm doing is I'm just kind of trying to wipe off all that extra goop that's down in there, just sticking some of my denatured alcohol on a Q-tip and just cleaning it a little bit. Nice and clean. And then I'm going to take the other side of it and try to dry it off a little. Shake some of that alcohol out. We want to let that dry now for a few minutes before we put it back together. Okay, my bearing is dry now. It looks like it's most of the alcohol is evaporated off of it, so I'm going to go ahead and reassemble this reel. There's two schools of thought here. There's some people I know who actually oil this bearing and put some oil on it. I'm not going to. The reason being is the reason this bearing stops working is because it gets goop on it, gunk and oil, and it's a one-way bearing. And if there's a little bit of dirt in there, it keeps the mechanism that keeps this bearing from spinning backwards. It gunks that up, so it defeats the purpose. I'm not putting any oil on it. That being said, I'm going to go on and stick it back together. So I take the bearing. There's two little pins on the back of it. Those slide into a position to where they can only go one way. One other thing you want to notice is that the back reel switch is up on the top. You want to make sure that the back reel switch on the bearing, that little switch right there, matches up with it. So I'm going to stick that on. Stick it on there. That's on. It's on perfect. And then I'm going to put the 3 screws back into the bearing. Mount it back where it belongs. Like I said, this is a pretty easy task to do. You don't have to be very mechanically inclined to do this, and I think a reel repair shop's going to charge you 20 bucks a reel to do this. And I can't see paying it, especially when I can do it myself, for what we just did. Alright, put the spool back in place. Then you put the bushing in place on top of that. It'll slide down in that hole. Then you can put the nut on top of that. Tighten it down just a little bit. Now it may take you a couple times to get this exactly right. This cap here has teeth on it that match the teeth on the nut. So if it's not quite exactly right, you may have to tighten it up or loosen it up a little more. I'm going to tighten it just a little more. And then it'll match up. And then the holes will match up, and then you can put the 2 screws back in. Put the screws in. Don't tighten them too tight because they'll strip pretty easily. Put the other screw back in. Take your gear, stick that back on the shaft. Take a washer, stick it back on the shaft. It'll only go on one way, so stick it back on. Put your spool back on. Good as new. It won't back reel anymore now. So that's how you fix the old school Stradix. This also works on the Symmetries, any of the old 2000 reels that have this problem.